The Director of Ceremonies, Ms. Montagnane Baitse, Your Excellency and dear brother, Dr. Nangulo Mbumba, and your dear wife, the First Lady of Namibia, Her Excellency Mrs. Suchi Mbumba, the Vice President of Botswana, Your Honor, Mr. Slamba Tsuhwane, Chief Justice, Terence Ranwani, and Honorable Justices present, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Mr. Pandus Kilimani, Honorable Ministers from Namibia and Botswana, the President of the Court of Appeal, Justice Tebogo Tau, Honorable Members of Parliament, the Chairman of Ntwari Khosi Puso Gaboroni and Marara Mawahanu, senior government officials, senior civil service chiefs, our religious leaders, Baruti, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Walilepo, Khoe Mora, Dumela Moro Tayo. Good morning. Your Excellency and my very dear brother, President Nangulo Mbumba, we are immensely grateful that you were able to join us this morning to pay tribute to a very dear friend of mine who was also dear to you and your fellow citizens. His mortal remains were interred at the Heroes Acre in Windhoek some short 3 weeks ago. His spirit, however, continues to live on. On that day, on the 25th of February 2024, without sparing themselves from adverse weather elements, Namibians from all walks of life lined up the streets to bid farewell to their beloved president. In the same expression of grief, multitudes thronged the respective venues for memorial services and the burial ceremony. We too, in Botswana, are here, Your Excellency, to memorialize, to honor, and to celebrate him as we love and cherish him. We will never forget the little boy born on a secular farm in Grootfontein, who ended up as president of the land of the brave, Hage Geingob. We are encouraged by what we saw in Namibia. There was never a moment when Madam Monica Gengos and the bereaved family were without comfort and support in that great hour of need. As President and Comforter-in-Chief, you took the script so effortlessly to help ease their heartaches and pain. We thank and repose honor on you, my dear brother. For guiding all the grieving multitudes in Namibia, in Botswana, SADC, Africa, and beyond. We applaud you for your leadership as you calmly ensured your appointments raised no tension, no anxiety. We too found it fitting that the great admiration with which Dr. Hage Geingob was held should also be celebrated here in Botswana, because yes, we have skin in the game of the life of Geingob. We are therefore gathered in this memorial to trace the footprint of a giant that once lived among us and walked across the vast landscape of the fine sands of both the Namib and the Kalahari deserts. Many have ably described this colossal of a man with affable accolades reserved only for the knighted and the commanders of supreme honor and authority. He was a towering figure, a leading statesman, both in stature and accomplishments, yet he bowed himself so lowly and dressed himself in unmistaken humility. He was never in a hurry to outpace some of us who came well after him and needed to lean on him, to learn from him, and mimic his well-orchestrated craft of steering the presidency, not to mention his nimble dancing skills, particularly on the SWAPO campaign trail. Perhaps, instead of expending all the adjectives that best describe Dr. Hage Geingob, I should pause here, take a detour and venture into why Botswana mattered so much to him and his fellow compatriots, who had to undertake the grueling and risky journey in pursuit of freedom. Dr. Geingob sketched a roadmap that stretched from his birthplace of Grootfontein, with Kalkfontein being the last turnoff before stopovers in Gantsi, Sihitwa, and Maung, all the way to a White House in Francistown, now plot 7440. And I know, President Mbumba, you'll remember Maung because, as you told me, that's where you celebrated Christmas in the 60s with a piece of bread. There, he joined his fellow Southwest Africa People's Organization, or SWAPO, comrades in their inevitable pipeline into exile. Given the geopolitics of the region, Botswana's pipeline to exile became a natural choice for Geingob and others in the struggle for self-determination. Freely given to hospitality, families in Botswana provided a warm welcome and upkeep to the many who were forced into exile to escape oppression and persecution from white minority settler regimes. The ever-ready supply of genuine acts of kindness transformed the homes of many Botswana into safe houses for freedom fighters and liberation stalwarts. Luminaries such as Samora Machel found an abode at that house, first of PG Matante in White City, Francistown. Then Samora Machel went to Pileng in Lobatse at a home belonging to our very own Mr. Kabuyesili. We also learned that operating underground in South Africa and beyond its borders, the iconic Nelson Mandela assumed the alliances of David Mutsamai with his Ethiopian-issued travel document pointing to Bechuanaland as his domicile. I'm making mention of these key freedom fighters not to minimize the role played by other notable figures, many in the audience too, but to underscore the fact that Botswana, and ordinary Botswana in particular, took it upon themselves to shoulder the onerous responsibility to safely care for these leaders and commanders. Their quest for freedom, equal justice, equity, social upliftment, and empowerment of the majority black citizens of their respective countries was much weightier than the sum of all the predicament of our citizens had to contend with on a daily basis. So much depended on the safe passage that Botswana kept open. It is no surprise that all the Namibian former presidents, including you, my brother, President Mbumba, found refuge, safety, and passage in and through Botswana in pursuit of your liberation. The White House, not in Washington, in Francistown, now plot 7440 of the Kayos, provided refuge to all former presidents, all four presidents of Namibia at various times, and countless other freedom fighters of all liberation movements in Southern Africa. Those from then Southwest Africa were by far the majority. Lest we forget, Botswana at the time was preoccupied with cardinal issues of wider representation and gaining access to a platform in the then institutions of the African Council, as well as the Bechuanaland Protectorate Legislative Council, where the latest Constitutional Conference in Lobatse in 1963 endorsed a one-person, one-vote dictum, together with a host of other fundamental political rights and freedoms. To this day, we still march to the same drumbeat, respecting a trusted franchise that continues to return the ruling party, the BDP, that I lead, to the corridors of power ever since we made the first attempt of universal suffrage as a unified republic in March of 1965. I should emphasize that the emergent spirited defiance campaign of the liberation movements across the Southern African region in the early 1960s coincided with the dawning and consolidation of the nationalist movements in political formations. During that era, the Bechuanaland Liberal Party, BLP, was founded in 1958, led by the composer of our national anthem, Dr. Kgalema Motsete, followed by LD Ralitadi, followed by the Bechuanaland People's Party, the BPP, founded in 1960, followed by the Bechuanaland Independence Party, BIP, in 1961. Then came the creation of the mighty red machine of the Bechuanaland Democratic Party in 1962, with its propagation of democratic ideals underpinned and nurtured by traditional values like consultation and dialogue, i.e. Terisano, among others. The Botswana National Front also came into being in 1965. This is the picture of Botswana's political canvas in the 1960s, which stirred a lot of whirlwind for political party activism and the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Returning to the issue of statecraft in laying the foundations of a modern democratic nation-state, what we lacked in the advantages of and sophistry of state apparatus that we have today, the citizens of this country more than adequately compensated for with the generosity of their spirit and unpretentious consideration of distressed neighbors and their welfare. Being hospitable, therefore, is deeply rooted in our culture and traditions. To a very large extent, Botho is ingrained in every fiber of our societal identities and relations, owing to the culture of Botho and the ethic of care for humanity and freedom. Dr. Geingob settled in Francistown. Having invested in the successful political exhibition of self-rule, slowly the economic cogs also started to turn and lock in place. This strengthened our capacity and confidence to extend the rich legacy of the national principles we set for ourselves at the coalface of our nation building, namely democracy, development, self-reliance, and unity, into a broader context of diverse ecosystem of regional cooperation frameworks and projects. These would later find full expression in our membership to bodies such as the Frontline States and the Southern African Development Coordination Conference, SADCC, that preceded the current SADC. We are humbled that such an enduring legacy of sustained democratic ideals and a climate of peace gave the necessary assurance to our neighbors who fled atrocities from east, west, north, and south to finally settle in Botswana, or opted to use Botswana as a reliable conduit to Lusaka, to Arusha, and Dar es Salaam. Dr. Geingob was among those that came to Botswana through the same channel before the onward journey took him to the distant lands to intensify their campaigns for material and other forms of support necessary to aid their justified and noble cause. Instances of an offer of a humble abode to those that were waging liberation struggle soon expanded to other places beyond Lobatse and Francistown. I believe most in this room would recall how in the 1980s, Gaborone, Mogoditsane, right in our neighborhood, and Muchudi also grew in significance as recipients of refugees, which inadvertently exposed their residence to military raids and aggression from the racist outfit hemmed in the hills of Pretoria. As you would recall, the most flagrant of such aggression occurred on the 14th of June, 1985, midwinter, while multiple bombings of different houses in different locations of Gaborone and Mogoditsane, resulting in the loss of innocent lives perpetrated by the murderous apartheid regime. As would be appreciated, Botswana's voice was too small, and had it not been for its amplification through multilateral fora at the United Nations, it could have easily been drowned by the cacophony of the vicious machinery of the apartheid system that spread its tentacles to other jurisdictions. In this way, a letter dated the 17th of June, 1985, coupled with a bucket full of tears from our then minister, from the letter from the permanent representative of Botswana to the United Nations, reference S/17279, was sufficient to convince the United Nations Security Council to adopt a unanimous resolution 568 in brackets 1985, rebuking the premeditated acts of aggression by the apartheid regime while calling for strengthened capacity to be extended to Botswana to be able to assist refugees. And yes, the author of that letter was none other than the ebullient Ambassador Elijah Joseph Lehoaila. Despite these circumstances that we faced as a country, and whatever the cost and price of freedom, with several of our nationals paying the ultimate price as collateral, we were unrelenting, unflinching, and undeterred in our resolve to ensure that the entire region is liberated. That is why, in 1984, Botswana didn't entertain the spirit of the infamous Non-Aggression Pact, popularized as the Nkomati Accords. That is why the decision of the United Nations Secretary General in June 1989 to appoint Ambassador Joseph Lehoaila as Deputy Special Representative for Namibia after the protestation of the African bloc was met with acclamation from our government during the tenure of the late President Sekitumi Lekwet Johnny Masiri. We built these guardrails partly to preserve our sovereignty, given our history of facing persistent threats and petulant demands of incorporation into High Commission territories into the Union of South Africa. In fact, in a related matter, about 2 decades preceding our independence, as was said earlier by Ambassador Lehoaila, an act of diplomatic finesse took place when one of Botswana's visionaries, Kgosi Tsekedi Khama of Pilikwe, petitioned the United Nations, arguing against South Africa's 1945 proposal to annex then Southwest Africa and now free liberated Namibia. In the masterstroke memorandum of the 29th April 1946, addressed to the United Nations and co-signed by 5 other Dikhosi of Botswana, how could we have ever imagined the implicit foreshadowing of the excellent bilateral relations that subsist between Botswana and Namibia today? How could we? And how could we possibly ever deviate from such a sure foundation and or find cause to break filial ties that bind our peoples since the arrival of the Herero refugee group in 1904, led by Umahona Samuel Maherero, escaping German genocide in their homeland? How could we? This is a demonstrable fact that Botswana's foreign policy posture has always been predicated on wishing for others what we wished for ourselves, joined at the hip with our neighbors and our fate ever so intertwined. Covertly and in open forums, we engaged in complex negotiations and set an agenda that focused on safeguarding the continued availability of the territory of Botswana for purposes of transit, support, contribution to the liberation struggle that finally brought about total emancipation of the majority in our neighboring states who faced oppression on an industrial scale. Gleaning from the attributes just rendered by Ambassador Lehuaila, by Mr. Zio Chowdhury, by Mrs. Julia Matumo, the United Nations system midwifed the birth of the Republic of Namibia. The United Nations General Assembly, through its resolution 3295-29, or XXIX, of 13 December 1974, while reaffirming the legitimacy of the struggle of the Namibian people, also recognized SWAPO as the authentic representative of the Namibian people at the United Nations. Adequate financial provision from the United Nations budget was made available to ensure the propagation of the inalienable rights of the Namibian people, key to which was the right to self-determination. It was therefore not unexpected that during the final days of his administration, President Geingob, as a devout liberation icon, would censure those that took an opposing view at the recent case before the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and went further to call on the United Nations Security Council to act swiftly and ensure that resolutions regarding the rights of the people of Palestine to live in peace are respected and for them to determine their own future too. We have been given full perspective regarding the impactful role of Dr. Hage Geingob, who served first as a petitioner for the freedom of Namibia at the United Nations, then as a founding director for the United Nations Institute for Namibia that operated from Lusaka, you said Namibia, between 1975 and 1990, to crystallize and reinforce the transitional arrangements that paved the roadway towards freedom of the Namibian people. The United Nations Council for Namibia was also established, composed of, among others, Botswana and Zambia. Under the auspices of the United Nations Transition Assistance Group, UNTAG, the prospect of Namibia achieving self-rule materialized. At its full complement, a forced deployment of 8,000, comprising men and women from civilian, police, and military components, were drawn from more than 120 countries to assist this process in Namibia. The combined multilateral efforts were evidenced by the adoption of declarations and resolutions of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, at its meeting from the 6th to the 11th June 1974 in Mogadishu, Somalia. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, several resolutions on the question of Namibia were adopted by both the United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Security Council, especially the Council's Resolution 435 of 29 September 1978, which called for the withdrawal of the South African forces from Namibia and transfer of power to the people of Namibia. The efforts I have just outlined are a demonstration of the faith we have as a country in the instrumentality of multilateralism that I know the late President Geingob was also sworn by. Ultimately, the combined actions by governments, international bodies, and NGOs set in motion the process leading to the lifting of the independence banner of freedom high over the contrasting beautiful Namibia, as echoed by Axali Kobeseb's composition of the Namibian national anthem at the time. To mark the ceremony that took place just after midnight on the 21st of March 1990, the then Secretary General, Dr. Javier Philippe Ricardo Perez de Cuellar, administered the oath of office to President Dr. Sam Nujoma in accordance with the terms of the new constitution that contained a visible mark made by Dr. Geingob as the pen holder. In his final report to the Security Council on the 28th of March 1990, the Secretary General then reported, and I quote, "Thus was achieved in dignity and with great rejoicing the goal of independence for Namibia, for which the United Nations and its member states have striven for so long," end quote. So a moment such as this memorial, Your Excellency and dear friends, gives us a rejoicing in the full confidence that when called upon, Botswana never failed to step up and offer a helping hand. No wonder the late President Hage Geingob had so much affinity and attachment to this country. In his fleeting time here on earth, we earned the whole of Namibia as a true trusted friend of Botswana. And yes, it's my pleasure and privilege to declare in this open memorial that Namibia is a good neighbor. Namibia is a good neighbor. And President Geingob has throughout his life-long quest and efforts to build this wonderful country added value to the neighborhood, a neighborhood we in Botswana are resolute to continue embracing ceaselessly, with you, President Mbumba, at the helm and well beyond our terms of service. President Geingob and I established an ambience and pattern whose ultimate objective could, hopefully, one day result in the elimination of the border between our two countries. May the soul of my very dear brother, President Hage Gottfried Geingob, rest in eternal peace. Botswana, say a big thank you, for you made us better for having touched our lives. We offer comfort to Madam Monica Gengos and the family, and our thanks to her for her loving, respecting, and cherishing our president, our shared president, to the very end. God bless Namibia. God bless Botswana. Pula, let it rain.